The military base conference room fell silent as Captain Derek Morrison's mocking laughter echoed off the walls. His face was red with arrogance as he pointed at the female security guard standing by the door, her dark skin gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. "You," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to tell me about security protocols? A glorified door opener is going to lecture a decorated officer?" The woman, whose name tag read Johnson, stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Her hands remained clasped behind her back in a military rest position, but something about her posture suggested she was anything but bothered by his words. "Sir, I'm simply doing my job," she replied, her voice calm and measured. "This is a restricted area, and you don't have the proper clearance for today's briefing." Morrison stepped closer, invading her space. Several other officers in the hallway turned to watch the confrontation. "Listen here, sweetheart. I've been in the military longer than you've probably been alive. I don't need some security guard telling me where I can and cannot go on my base." That's when the conference room doors burst open. 3 men in Navy SEAL uniforms emerged, their faces stern and professional. The one in front, a battle-hardened commander with silver in his hair and medals covering his chest, locked eyes with the scene unfolding before him. Morrison, sensing backup, turned to the SEALs with a confident smirk. "Gentlemen, perfect timing. Can you believe this guard is trying to—" "Attention!" The SEAL commander's voice cracked like thunder. Morrison instinctively straightened, but his face showed confusion when he realized the 3 SEALs weren't looking at him. They were standing at full attention, their eyes fixed on the woman Morrison had just been mocking. The commander's next words made Morrison's blood run cold. "Major Johnson, ma'am, we weren't informed you'd be conducting security inspections today." The color drained from Morrison's face as the woman he'd called a glorified door opener gave a slight nod to the SEALs. The casual way she accepted their salute spoke of someone completely comfortable with authority, someone who'd earned every ounce of respect being shown to her. "At ease, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a new weight now. "I'm here on special assignment from Central Command. This base has had several security breaches in the past month, and I've been sent to assess vulnerabilities." Her eyes slowly shifted to Morrison, who now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "And I must say, I've found quite a significant one." Morrison opened his mouth, then closed it. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The hallway seemed to close in around him as more personnel. 3 weeks earlier, Major Amara Johnson sat in a windowless office at the Pentagon, her decorated uniform a stark contrast to the plain gray walls surrounding her. Across from her sat General Patricia Wallace, a woman whose reputation for getting results was matched only by her reputation for unconventional methods. "Amara, I'll be direct," the general said, sliding a folder across the desk. "We have a problem at Fort Davidson, and I need someone who can operate below the radar." Amara opened the folder, her trained eyes scanning the contents quickly. Security breaches. Missing equipment manifests. Unauthorized access logs. What caught her attention most was the pattern, whoever was behind this new military protocol inside and out. "This looks like an inside job," Amara observed, her finger tracing a timeline of incidents. "Someone with rank, someone people trust." General Wallace nodded. "Exactly. Which is why I can't send in a traditional investigation team. If word gets out that we're looking into our own officers, whoever's responsible will disappear into the woodwork." She leaned forward. "I need you to go in undercover. Deep undercover." Amara looked up sharply. "How deep?" "Security guard. Low rank. Invisible." The general's expression was serious. "You'll have documentation showing you're newly transferred enlisted personnel working base security while your officer application is being processed. No one will look twice at you. No one will think you're a threat. And if I find who's responsible, you'll have full authority to handle it as you see fit." "But Amara," General Wallace's voice took on a warning tone, "this assignment will test you in ways combat never did. You'll face disrespect, dismissal. People will treat you like you're nobody. Can you handle that?" Amara thought of the men and women she'd served with, the lives she'd saved, the missions she'd completed. She thought of her father, who'd been one of the first black officers in his unit and had faced far worse. She thought of every person who'd ever underestimated her because of her gender or the color of her skin, and how she'd proven them wrong every single time. "I can handle it, ma'am." 2 days later, Amara arrived at Fort Davidson in civilian clothes, carrying a small duffel bag. The base was sprawling, home to over 5,000 personnel. Finding one corrupt officer would be like finding a needle in a haystack, a needle that didn't want to be found. Her handler, a sergeant named Marcus Hayes, who was one of only 3 people on base who knew her real identity, met her at the security office. He was a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Your cover's solid," Marcus said, handing her a security guard uniform and badge. "As far as anyone knows, you're Specialist Johnson, fresh from basic training, working security while waiting for your officer candidate application to process. You'll rotate through different posts, giving you access to most of the base." "What about the investigation? Where do I start?" Marcus pulled out a tablet, showing her the pattern of thefts. Military-grade equipment, night vision goggles, encrypted communication devices, body armor. Someone's building a private arsenal, and they're doing it right under our noses. He swiped to another screen. The thefts happen during high-traffic times, change of shift, during training exercises, when everyone's distracted. Security footage? Conveniently corrupted or missing for every incident. Whoever this is, they know our systems. Amara studied the data, her mind already working through possibilities. They'd need help. Multiple people, probably. One person can't move this much equipment alone without being noticed. That's what worries the general. We might be looking at a network, not just one bad actor. Over the next 2 weeks, Amara worked her assigned posts with quiet efficiency. She stood at doors, checked identification badges, and logged visitors. She watched and listened, her trained mind cataloging every detail, every anomaly, every person who seemed just a little too comfortable bending the rules. And she experienced exactly what General Wallace had warned her about. Officers barely acknowledged her existence. Some treated her like furniture. Others, like she was intellectually inferior because she wore an enlisted uniform and stood at doorways. But it was Captain Derek Morrison who stood out. Amara first noticed him during her second week when he'd barged through a checkpoint without proper authorization, brushing past her like she was invisible. When she'd politely reminded him of protocol, he'd laughed in her face. "Sweetheart, I don't have time for this. I've got important work to do. Not that you'd understand." Amara had let him pass that time. The morning of the SEAL briefing, Amara arrived at her post outside Conference Room B at 0600 hours. The room was in the secure wing of the administration building, requiring special clearance that changed daily. Today's briefing involved classified information about a joint operation in East Africa, and the guest list was strictly limited to personnel with top-secret security clearance and a need to know. Captain Morrison's name was not on that list. Amara had memorized every authorized name, every face. She'd also memorized Morrison's schedule, which showed he was supposed to be overseeing training exercises on the opposite side of the base. If he showed up here, it would confirm her suspicions that he was operating outside his authority. The morning progressed smoothly. Officers arrived, showed their credentials, and entered without incident. Amara stood at her post with perfect military bearing, her eyes alert but her demeanor calm. To anyone watching, she was just another security guard doing a routine job. At 0930, Captain Morrison rounded the corner, walking with a confident stride of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. He wasn't alone. Behind him walked Lieutenant Parker, a younger officer Amara had seen following Morrison around like a shadow for the past week. Both wore dress uniforms and carried tablets, looking official and busy. Morrison barely glanced at Amara as he approached the door. "Morning," he said dismissively, reaching for the handle. "Sir, I need to see your credentials and verify you're on the access list," Amara said, stepping smoothly into his path. Morrison stopped, irritation flashing across his face. "Excuse me? This is a restricted briefing, sir. I need to verify your authorization." "I'm Captain Derek Morrison," he said, his voice rising slightly. I've been on this base for 8 years. I don't need to show you anything. Amara kept her voice professional and even. Sir, regulations require all personnel to show proper credentials, regardless of rank or tenure. If you're authorized for this briefing, your name will be on my list. Lieutenant Parker shifted uncomfortably behind Morrison, but the captain's face was reddening. This was the moment Amara had been waiting for, the moment when Morrison's arrogance would override his caution. Listen here. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a menacing tone. I don't know who you think you are, but you're clearly new here and don't understand how things work. Now step aside before you embarrass yourself. I cannot do that, sir. Please show me your credentials. That's when Morrison made his first critical mistake. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his identification, but not his regular military ID. What he showed Amara was a hastily forged temporary access badge, the kind used for visiting personnel. It was a good forgery, but Amara had been trained to spot counterfeits. The holographic seal was slightly off-center, and the magnetic strip's alignment was wrong by a fraction of a millimeter. This badge appears to be invalid, sir, Amara said calmly, though her heart was racing. This was it, proof that Morrison was using forged credentials. I'll need to verify this with Security Command. Morrison's face went from red to purple. Invalid? How dare you question my credentials? Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, sir. You're Captain Derek Morrison. However, this badge doesn't match our security standards, and your name isn't on my authorized list. I'm going to have to ask you to step back while I verify. You're going to ask me? Morrison's voice echoed down the hallway, drawing attention from passing personnel. You're a nobody. A security guard who probably couldn't even pass officer training. And you're going to tell me, a decorated captain, where I can and cannot go. Lieutenant Parker touched Morrison's arm. Sir, maybe we should just... Morrison shook him off.
No.
I'm not going to be disrespected by some enlisted personnel who doesn't know her place. He turned back to Amara, his finger jabbing toward her face. You're going to step aside right now, or I'm going to have you written up for insubordination and obstructing a superior officer. Amara remained calm, but inside, she was calculating. Morrison was panicking, making mistakes. The forged badge. The public confrontation. This wasn't the behavior of someone confident in their position. This was someone desperate to maintain their cover. Sir, I'm simply following protocol, she said. If you're authorized for this briefing, we can clear this up quickly. But I cannot allow anyone to enter without proper verification, regardless of rank. That's when Morrison played his final card, the one that would seal his fate. He pulled out his phone and made a show of typing something quickly.
Fine.
I'm reporting you to Colonel Briggs right now. We'll see how long you last on this base after he hears about this. But Amara had been watching Lieutenant Parker, and she saw something that made her instinct scream. The younger officer's hand had moved to his own phone, and his fingers were flying across the screen in a pattern that looked nothing like typing a message. It looked like someone accessing a remote system. Amara made a split-second decision. She tapped the small emergency button hidden under her collar, a signal to Marcus that things were escalating. Then she did something that surprised Morrison completely. She smiled. Sir, I think you should know that all our security systems are being monitored in real time today. Every access attempt, every badge scan, every communication in this hallway is being recorded and analyzed. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. If there's any irregularity in your... But Commander Reeves wasn't looking at Morrison with support. He was looking at Amara with the respect of one warrior for another. And when he called her Major Johnson, the entire carefully constructed house of cards that Morrison had built was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Morrison's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then pure terror as the implications hit him. Behind him, Lieutenant Parker had gone from white to green, looking like he might be sick. And Amara, maintaining her composure despite the surge of satisfaction, prepared to drop the final hammer on Captain Derek Morrison's career. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Captain Morrison stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color had drained from his face so completely that Amara briefly worried he might actually faint. I don't. Morrison stammered, his eyes darting between Amara and Commander Reeves. There must be some mistake. She's just a security guard. Her badge says. Her badge says exactly what it needs to say for her assignment, Commander Reeves interrupted, his voice cold and professional. Major Amara Johnson is one of the most decorated officers in Special Operations. She's saved more lives than you've probably met in your entire career, Captain. And right now, you're in a world of trouble. Lieutenant Parker took a step backward, trying to distance himself from Morrison, but Amara had already signaled to the military police who'd been stationed nearby as part of the operation. 2 MPs appeared from around the corner, their hands resting on their sidearms. Lieutenant Parker, Amara said, her voice now carrying the full authority of her rank, please don't move. You're both going to want to cooperate fully with what happens next. Morrison finally found his voice, though it came out weak and desperate. This is entrapment. You set me up. You can't. I can and I did, Amara replied calmly. She pulled out her own credentials, her real ones, and held them up for everyone to see. The Major's insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Captain Morrison, you're under investigation for theft of military property, falsifying official documents, and using forged credentials to access restricted areas. Lieutenant Parker, you're under investigation as an accessory to these crimes. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Officers and enlisted personnel lined the hallway, whispering among themselves. Some looked shocked, others satisfied. Morrison hadn't been popular, and his arrogance had made him plenty of enemies. Marcus Hayes appeared from the crowd, his security credentials clearly displayed. Major Johnson, we've just intercepted a data transmission from Lieutenant Parker's phone. He was attempting to wipe the security logs remotely. He looked at Parker with disappointment. Son, you just added tampering with evidence to your list of charges. Parker's legs seemed to give out, and he slumped against the wall. I didn't want to do it, he said, his voice breaking. Captain Morrison said it was just bending a few rules, that everyone did it. He said we deserved better equipment for our service, that the military owed us. Shut up. Morrison snapped, but his authority was gone. He was just a desperate man watching his career implode. Commander Reeves stepped forward, and the other 2 SEALs flanked him. Captain Morrison, I want you to understand something. 3 years ago, Major Johnson ran into a burning building in Kandahar to pull out 5 of my men. She had a dislocated shoulder and 2 cracked ribs, and she still made 3 trips into that inferno. One of those men she saved was my brother. His voice was hard as steel. So, when I see you treating her like she's beneath you, when I hear you mocking her service, it takes every ounce of my self-control not to forget I'm an officer and a gentleman. One of the other SEALs, a younger man with a scar across his jaw, spoke up. I was one of the 5 she saved, sir. I watched her carry my teammate through enemy fire while buildings exploded around us. She's the bravest person I've ever served with. He looked at Morrison with undisguised contempt. And you're a disgrace to the uniform. The MPs moved forward. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Parker, you're both coming with us. You have the right to remain silent. Wait. Morrison's voice cracked with panic. You want to know about the equipment? I'll tell you everything. I'll cooperate fully. Just please. Amara held up her hand, stopping the MPs. She stepped closer to Morrison, close enough that only he could hear her next words. Captain, you had every opportunity to do the right thing. Every time you walked past a security checkpoint without showing credentials, every time you falsified a document, every time you stole equipment meant to protect our soldiers, you made a choice. And when you saw me standing at that door, you had another choice. You could have shown your credentials like everyone else. You could have accepted that the rules applied to you too. She paused, letting her words sink in. But instead, you chose arrogance. You chose to believe that your rank made you better than everyone else, that someone like me, a black woman in a security guard uniform, couldn't possibly be your equal. That prejudice, that blindness, That's what brought you down, Captain. Not me. You did this to yourself. Morrison's face crumpled, and for a moment, Amara almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Take them, she said to the MPs. As Morrison and Parker were led away in handcuffs, the crowd began to disperse, but the whispers would continue for weeks. Amara could hear snippets of conversation, amazement, respect, and more than a few people admitting they'd underestimated the new security guard. Commander Reeves approached her with a genuine smile. Major, that was quite the performance. Though I have to ask, how did you stay so calm? If someone had spoken to me the way he spoke to you. Amara allowed herself a small smile. Commander, I've been underestimated my entire life. By teachers who thought I wouldn't amount to anything. By recruiters who tried to steer me away from combat roles. By fellow officers who assumed I got my rank through quotas rather than merit. Captain Morrison was just one more person who looked at me and saw only what he wanted to see. Amara nodded, feeling the weight of the past 3 weeks beginning to lift. Good. Make sure everyone involved faces appropriate charges. No deals, no special treatment because of rank. Over the next several hours, Amara gave her formal statement, helped secure the evidence, and coordinated with the Judge Advocate General's office to ensure the prosecution had everything they needed. By late afternoon, she was finally able to change out of the security guard uniform and back into her major's dress uniform. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw the medals on her chest, the rank insignia on her shoulders, all the external markers of her achievements. But she also remembered how she looked that morning, standing at a door in a simple uniform, being dismissed and disrespected by someone who should have known better. General Wallace called her personally that evening. Major Johnson, I've received the report. Exceptional work. You've broken up a theft ring that's been operating for over a year, recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment, and identified security vulnerabilities we didn't even know existed. Thank you, ma'am. Though I have to say, the assignment tested me in ways I didn't expect. Being invisible is harder than being in combat, isn't it? The general's voice was knowing. When people can see your rank, they have to respect you. But when they can't see it, you find out who really has honor and who just performs it. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly it. Well, you've earned a rest. Take some leave. Get away from military bases for a while. But as Amara packed her things that night, preparing to leave Fort Davidson, she thought about all the real security guards, the enlisted personnel, the people who did essential jobs without recognition or glory. People like the woman she'd pretended to be for 3 weeks. They faced disrespect and dismissal every day, and they didn't have the luxury of revealing a major's insignia to make it stop. She made a mental note to include recommendations in her report, not just about security procedures, but about the culture that had allowed someone like Morrison to flourish. A culture where rank meant more than character, where appearances mattered more than substance. The next morning, as Amara prepared to leave the base for the last time, she stopped by the security office. The real security guards were there, men and women who did the job she'd been pretending to do. She spent an hour talking with them, listening to their stories, acknowledging their service. Thank you, she told them simply. Your work matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. One of the guards, a young woman named Davis who couldn't have been more than 22, looked at her with tears in her eyes. Major, what you did, showing that someone like Captain Morrison couldn't just walk all over us, it means more than you know. Amara squeezed her shoulder. You never needed me to prove your worth. You had it all along. Sometimes the people who don't see it are the ones with the real problem. As she drove away from Fort Davidson, Amara's phone rang. It was Commander Reeves. Major, I just wanted to say, that thing you did back there, standing your ground, not backing down even when he was trying to humiliate you, you reminded me why I'm proud to serve with people like you. Thank you, Commander. That means a lot. Also, his voice took on a lighter tone, the stories already spreading through the special operations community. You're going to be a legend. The major who played a guard and took down a corrupt captain. It's got a nice ring to it. 6 months later, Major Amara Johnson stood at a podium in the Pentagon's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of over 300 military personnel. The room was filled with officers of all ranks, enlisted soldiers, and civilian contractors, all gathered for the quarterly leadership summit. General Wallace had asked her to speak about the Fort Davidson operation, but more importantly, about the lessons learned from going undercover as someone society often overlooked. Amara gripped the edges of the podium, took a breath, and began. 6 months ago, I was assigned to investigate a theft ring at Fort Davidson. To do this effectively, I had to become invisible. I wore the uniform of a security guard, stood at doorways, and watched as people revealed who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. Captain Derek Morrison is now serving 8 years in military prison for theft, fraud, and corruption. Lieutenant Parker received 6 years. 3 other officers and 2 enlisted personnel received sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years. Together, they'd stolen over $700,000 in military equipment and compromised operational security on multiple occasions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The case had made headlines in military publications, but this was the first time Amara had spoken publicly about it. "But I'm not here to talk about their crimes," Amara continued. "I'm here to talk about something more insidious, the culture that allowed them to operate for over a year without being caught." Captain Morrison wasn't careful because he didn't think he needed to be. He believed his rank made him untouchable. He believed that people in positions he considered lesser wouldn't dare question him. She clicked a remote, and a slide appeared behind her showing the security guard uniform she'd worn. "For 3 weeks, I experienced what thousands of enlisted personnel experience every day. I was ignored, dismissed, spoken to with contempt by people who should have known better. And I learned something crucial. When people don't see your rank, you discover who really believes in the values we claim to uphold." In the audience, Commander Reeves sat with his SEAL team, nodding in agreement. Scattered throughout the room were other personnel from Fort Davidson, including some who'd witnessed the confrontation that day. "There's a young security guard at Fort Davidson named Specialist Keisha Davis," Amara said. "She's been doing her job with excellence for 2 years. She follows every protocol, treats everyone with respect, and takes pride in her work. But until the Morrison incident, officers routinely bypassed her checkpoints, dismissed her instructions, and made her feel like she didn't matter." Amara's voice grew stronger. After Morrison's arrest, something changed. Officers started showing their credentials without being asked. They said please and thank you. They acknowledged her as a professional doing an important job. And do you know why? Because they finally understood that the person checking their ID might be more than they appear. That security guard might be a major. That janitor might be a general. That person they're about to disrespect might be someone who's saved lives, led missions, and earned every ounce of respect they're about to deny them. She let the words hang in the air. But here's the problem. People shouldn't need to wonder if someone is secretly high-ranking before they treat them with dignity. Every person in uniform, regardless of rank, deserves respect. Every person doing their job with integrity deserves courtesy. The way we treat people when we think they can't do anything about it, that's who we really are. The room was silent now, everyone listening intently. Captain Morrison looked at me and saw a black woman in a security uniform. His prejudices told him I couldn't possibly be a threat, that I wasn't worth his time or respect. He made assumptions based on appearance rather than observing the reality in front of him. And those assumptions destroyed his career. Amara advanced to the next slide, showing statistics about discrimination complaints, security breaches, and morale issues across various bases. These numbers tell a story. Bases with cultures of respect and dignity have fewer security incidents, higher morale, and better operational effectiveness. Bases where rank is used as a weapon rather than a responsibility have more problems across every metric. The data is clear. How we treat each other matters, not just morally but operationally. She could see some officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Good. Discomfort meant they were listening. I'm not standing here claiming to have all the answers. I've made mistakes in my career. I've had moments where I let rank go to my head, where I forgot that leadership is about service, not superiority. But the Morrison operation reminded me of something my father told me when I first enlisted. Amara's voice softened slightly. My father was one of the first black officers in his unit back in the 80s. He faced discrimination that would be unthinkable today. Amara stepped back from the podium, her presentation complete. I'll take questions now. Hands shot up across the auditorium. Amara pointed to a lieutenant colonel in the front row. Major Johnson, how do we change a culture that's been established for years? Some of these attitudes are deeply ingrained. It starts with accountability, Amara replied. When officers like Morrison face real consequences, it sends a message. But more importantly, it starts with each of us examining our own behavior. Ask yourself, do I treat people differently based on their rank? Do I show the same courtesy to an E1 as I do to an O6? If the answer is no, you're part of the problem. Another hand, a young enlisted woman, probably fresh out of basic training, stood nervously. Ma'am, what do you say to people like me who face disrespect regularly? How do we handle it without jeopardizing our careers? Amara's expression softened. That's the hardest question, and I wish I had an easy answer. Document everything. Report through proper channels. Find mentors who will advocate for you. But most importantly, don't let other people's lack of character change yours. Specialist Davis at Fort Davidson kept doing her job with excellence even when people treated her poorly. That's strength. That's real military bearing. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Officers asked about implementing culture changes. Enlisted personnel asked about standing up to disrespect. Civilians asked about their role in military culture. Finally, General Wallace stood and returned to the podium. Thank you, Major Johnson. I think we can all agree this has been illuminating. She turned to the audience. Major Johnson's presentation will be part of mandatory leadership training going forward. But I want to add something. The Morrison case isn't an isolated incident. We've identified similar issues at 7 other installations. This is a systemic problem, and it requires systemic solutions. After the presentation, as people filed out, dozens of personnel approached Amara. Some thanked her. Others shared their own stories of being underestimated or disrespected. A few admitted they recognized themselves in her description of Morrison and vowed to do better. Commander Reeves found her in the crowd. Hell of a speech, Major. You made some people very uncomfortable. Good, Amara replied. Comfortable people don't change. You know the story's taken on a life of its own, right? I heard a version where you took down 10 corrupt officers in hand-to-hand combat. Amara laughed. Military rumors always make things more dramatic. The truth is usually more boring: paperwork, surveillance, and patience. Maybe. But the core message stays the same. Don't underestimate people based on appearances. That's a lesson worth spreading, even if the details get exaggerated. As the crowd thinned, Amara noticed Specialist Davis standing hesitantly near the back of the auditorium. Amara waved her over. Specialist Davis. I didn't know you'd be here. The young woman smiled shyly. General Wallace invited several of us from Fort Davidson, ma'am. I wanted to thank you again. Things have really changed at the base. People actually see us now. You earned that respect long before I arrived, Amara said firmly. Never forget that. I won't, ma'am. And I wanted you to know, I applied for officer training. I was always afraid to try. Thought maybe I wasn't good enough. But watching you stand up to Captain Morrison, seeing you refuse to back down, it made me realize I was underestimating myself. Amara felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's wonderful. You're going to make an excellent officer. I hope so, ma'am. And when I am an officer, I'm going to remember what it felt like to be overlooked. I'm going to make sure I treat everyone with respect, regardless of rank. Then Morrison's downfall will have accomplished something beyond just removing a corrupt officer. It'll have inspired someone to be better. That's how we change culture, one person at a time. That evening, Amara sat in her apartment, reflecting on the day. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from fellow officers, thank you notes from enlisted personnel who'd attended the presentation, even a message from her father saying he'd heard about the speech and was proud of her. But the message that meant the most came from General Wallace. Major Johnson, you've done more than solve a case. You've started a conversation this military needs to have. Well done. Amara thought about Captain Morrison, now in prison with years to contemplate his choices. She thought about the equipment they'd recovered, the security vulnerabilities they'd fixed, the network of corruption they'd dismantled. But mostly, she thought about the moment in that hallway when Morrison had looked at her with such contempt, so certain of his superiority. He'd seen a security guard, a woman, a black enlisted soldier who couldn't possibly be a threat. His prejudices had made him blind, and his arrogance had made him careless. She couldn't fix every injustice. She couldn't change every prejudiced mind. But she could tell her story, she could hold people accountable, and she could continue to serve with the integrity her father had taught her.
Her phone buzzed again.
This time it was Commander Reeves. By the way, the team wants to know when you're coming back to active operations. We could use someone who's not afraid to stand in a doorway and refuse to move, even when a captain is yelling at her. Amara smiled and typed back. Give me a month. I've got 3 more installations to visit and 7 more speeches to give. Turns out being underestimated is a skill set the military wants to study. Fair enough. Just remember, you're always welcome back with the SEALs. We respect people who earn it, not people who demand it. As Amara set down her phone, she felt a sense of peace. The Morrison case was closed. The stolen equipment was recovered. The security vulnerabilities were being addressed. But more importantly, conversations were happening across the military about respect, dignity, and the difference between leadership and authority. Captain Derek Morrison had thought he could walk past a security guard without consequences. He'd thought his rank made him untouchable, his authority absolute. He'd looked at Major Amara Johnson and seen only what his prejudices allowed him to see. He'd been wrong about all of it. And that mistake, that moment of arrogance when he dismissed her as a glorified door opener, had been his downfall. Because the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate the person standing in your way, especially when that person is someone who's already proven they'll run into burning buildings to save lives, who's already earned the respect of warriors, who's already demonstrated that rank is earned through character, not demanded through ego. Morrison had frozen when the SEALs called her Major. But he should have been paying attention long before that. To the way she stood, the way she spoke, the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and didn't need anyone's validation. Those who truly deserve respect never have to demand it. They earn it through their actions, their integrity, and their willingness to stand firm for what's right, even when standing alone in a hallway against someone who thinks rank equals superiority. Major Amara Johnson had learned that lesson long ago. Captain Derek Morrison had learned it too late. And somewhere on a military base, a young security guard named Keisha Davis stood a little straighter, checked credentials a little more confidently, and remembered that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with quiet courage and unwavering integrity. Now, before we close the story, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Major Johnson's position? Have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected because others underestimated them based on their appearance or position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about respect and dignity, do me a favor. Hit that like button to help others find this message. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that challenge us to be better. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it, maybe someone who's been underestimated, or maybe someone who needs to remember that everyone deserves respect. Where are you watching this from? Comment your city and country below. I love seeing